For the larger topic of discussion, where we're starting to talk about ethics at a high level, do you mind kind of talking about what some of those considerations are at a broad brush for industry?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So look, let's say you are, I'll use a famous example brought out by ProPublica in a 2016 publication. So let's say the examples you give it are, we want to know who's at high risk of committing a crime within the next 2 years, right? Maybe the FBI might be interested in that sort of predictive software, for instance. And so you give it a bunch of examples that come from the, say, US criminal justice history. And you say, okay, look, here's the people who are most likely to reoffend based on historical data, yada, yada. Let's suppose wildly that there is some historical discrimination in our criminal justice system. And so let's say, for instance, just to give one kind of example, Black people are policed at a higher rate than not Black people. So you're going to, even if crime is identical in the various subpopulations, if you police a population more, you're going to quote unquote catch more things. And so over policing leads to a higher rate of arrest. And if you treat higher rate of arrest as a proxy for commits more crimes or commits crimes, then it's going to look like to an algorithm, Black people are more dangerous, are more likely to commit crimes than white people, for instance. And so it's going to give Black people a higher risk rating than white people, all else equal. And that's precisely what the software Compass did. So bias or discriminatory models or algorithms or AI, whatever you want to call it, that's sort of, if there's the big ethical risk of AI, it's bias or discriminatory algorithms, because there's various ways it can learn bias from a variety of factors. There's the data sets, there's how you set your threshold, which we can get into later. There's how you set your objective function, which we can get into later as well. But there's various ways you can wind up with discriminatory outputs. That's the first of three big ethical risks of AI. The second one, explainability. So look, when I said it's learning by example, what is it learning in those examples? Let's just take Pepe, for example, right? It does not, the algorithm is not looking at eyes and a nose and a mouth and things like that. It's looking at the thousands of pixels that comprise the photos of your dog, Pepe, and the thousands of relations among those pixels. So it's a phenomenally complex set of relations that the algorithm is noticing. We can't grasp those complex relations. It's just beyond the ken of our mere mortal brains. And so what you get is, and let's just say in the case of Pepe, you get accuracy. You get, oh, that actually got it right. But how it did it, we don't know. So this is what's the famous problem of a black box algorithm. We know what data we trained it on, and we know what its outputs look like, but we don't know all the crazy calculations that it's doing in between, so to speak. We don't know what happens between the inputs and the outputs. Excuse me. That's not so worrying when you're talking about identifying your dog in a picture. It's much more worrying when you're denying people credit, denying people an interview, denying people a mortgage, so on and so forth. Or your self-driving car powered by AI kills somebody. So that's the problem with black box algorithms, and it's because it's of the nature of machine learning that it's learning across thousands and tens of thousands of examples and the patterns that exist among those examples that it defies our human understanding, and so you get black box. And then the last thing I'll say is, second to last thing I'll say, privacy violations. So all those examples are often examples about how you and I behave in various ways, what we purchase, where we go. And so it's of the nature of machine learning, because it learns by example, that all else equal, the more examples, the better. Slightly fancier word for example, data. And so the more data you get, all else equal, the more accurate the ML is going to be. But if that's my data and your data, then that means that anyone who's creating machine learning, where they're making predictions about people, is highly incentivized to gather up as much data about us as possible, thus incentivizing violations of privacy. And that's just on getting the data to train your algorithm. Then there's also the kinds of predictions that you make about people, which can also constitute violations of privacy. So when I think about the ethical risks of AI, excuse me, I think about those three big ethical risks: bias, explainability, and privacy. That's because it's of the nature of the beast that is machine learning that it increases the probability of these kinds of ethical violations. The fourth bucket is just use case specific. So if you use your AI for various kinds of things, It raises the risk of certain kinds of ethical problems. So I already alluded to one earlier. The major ethical risk with self-driving cars is not bias or black boxes or privacy violations. It's killing and maiming. Excuse me. And so a lot of the ethical risks from AI or ML is use case specific. Okay, that's the end of my crash course.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for attending my lecture.